I now have the immense privilege of welcoming to the stage an award-winning, sorry, so multi-award winning, asexual activist and model, Yasmin Benoit.
Okay, well, hi everybody. Sorry for the delay. My taxi took me to the wrong Lumiere on the other side of London. But I, first of all, very pleased to be doing this, especially as one of two talks on asexuality at the same event. So thank you very much for being so inclusive here. And I know that Bliss is going to give a really good talk and covering like mononormativity and more about asexuality. So I thought that I would do something that was a bit more like specific to my experience and my intersection. So I was going to talk about my experience as a Black British girl in the British education system and how asexuality impacted my experiences in the education system. So I'm hoping that by the end of this, you'll know me very well, but you'll also know how we intersect with asexuality and the impact that that can have. And hopefully we can think of more ways that we can improve upon that. So I stayed in education for over a decade. I never took a gap year, graduated from my master's in 2019. And I've always really enjoyed school. I've enjoyed learning, but I can honestly say that I stopped feeling safe or included at school in Key Stage 2. So I would say that for most of my time there, it was quite contentious, even though I do think of myself as a very academic person. I first began experiencing discrimination in education when I was around 10 years old. That was when, I mean, obviously I always knew that I was Black, but I didn't realize it was going to be a problem until around that time. I wasn't safe with the students who bullied me, and I was aware that I was different, and I was not very protected by the all-white faculty within my primary school. I was aware that there was something, by the time you're kind of like, finishing up primary school, the hormones kind of kick in. The kids stopped wanting to play together. They started wanting to date each other, and they talked about fancying each other and going out with each other. To this day, I still don't know where we're going when we're 11, but everyone said they were going somewhere. And that was kind of my first moment of realizing that there was something different in my experience. But at that point, it wasn't really something that I was that concerned about. I didn't have the language, and we did have sex education in primary school level, but it was very much, they separated the boys from the girls. They taught the girls what a vagina was, they taught the boys what an erection was, and then in the end we got together, compared notes, and all just giggled about the whole thing. And that was pretty much all sex education was at that point. We did not know anything about different sexual orientations. We probably did, we knew what being gay was, but that's probably as far as it went. And then by the time I had the option, when it came to secondary school, I had this ingenious idea that boys were the problem. So if we got rid of the boys, then all of this relationship drama I was witnessing would go away. So I decided I would go to an all-girls school where no one would care about dating, no one would care about sex. The boys, that was my theory. I love it. I realized very quickly it's actually the opposite. The girls were deprived of boys, and thus everything was like way more intensified than it might have been otherwise. And I think it wasn't until secondary school where I kind of became aware of how your sexual orientation and your race can have a combined impact on things. Especially as a teenager, so much of your like developmental milestones are centered around, your first crush, your first kiss, your first date, your first boyfriend or girlfriend, second base, third base, all of that. It's very much a sign of your like maturity and your growth as a person. And this was also And around the time I started secondary school, it was like 2007 to like 2011. So it was peak Tumblr era. It was a time, it was kind of pre, like third wave feminism wasn't really a thing people were talking about. People weren't really talking about race, they weren't really talking about like different genders, being transgender or anything like that. But knowing kind of niche orientations was like not that uncommon. Like a lot of people in my school went to Pride. Lots of the girls were at least bi because of the absence of boys. Like that was like the experimentation is very much a thing. Everything they say about all girls schools turned out to be very true. And so because it was already such a conversation, it became more obvious that I wasn't experiencing things the way other people were. And that was when the focus came on trying to work out what was wrong with me. And even when I was able to discover the term asexuality, because it was, one of my friends who spent a lot of time on Tumblr heard the word, told me, and I was able to access information, fortunately, because of the time period that I was in. But it wasn't a term I was actually able to use because I quickly realized that no one believed me. So even though I felt like I was very obviously ticking all of even the most stereotypical boxes of asexuality, I very much ticked them. And I wasn't experiencing sexual attraction. I hadn't so much as kissed anybody. I was aromantic as well. I don't experience romantic attraction either. And I was just like a very awkward kid. So I'm like, I feel like almost every stereotype you would think of, like I'm ticking it. So why is it that people don't believe me? And eventually I worked out it's because of how I look. It was purely because I was Black was the reason people couldn't compute it. Because, Black girls are probably one of the most hypersexualized, Black people in general, one of the most hypersexualized demographic. And the way it impacts Black girls, you don't really get as much time to be perceived as a kid. And it kind of led to this, because I wasn't ticking because so many of the developmental milestones are so tied with your sexuality and how you're expressing it, because I wasn't expressing it, it was assumed very quickly that it was because I was like psychologically stunted, and that I just wasn't at the intellectual or personal level of everyone else. And it was pretty much infantilization, which it happens to asexual people quite a lot, regardless of what your race is. But I think it's particularly hazardous to be perceived as at all slow as a Black working class girl in the education system. And I kind of realized that I think one of the reasons why people were so quick to kind of come to that conclusion kind of came from a combination of things, because there was I'm sure lots of people here are probably aware of, the issues of discrimination within the education system, especially in the UK. It's actually very much parallels things that happened in the US as well. There was a study in 2017 by the Gender Justice and Opportunity organization, and they came up with this theory of adultification bias, which found that Black girls as young as 5 were seen as being less innocent, less in need of support, and more likely to be inherently bad in education. We're seen as being less innocent, we're more likely to be sexualized and perceived as fast and trying to attract male attention from a young age. And they found that Black girls between the ages of 10 and 14 were treated more harshly in education by their authority figures. And I'm quite sure that has something to do with not only why people perceived me at 14 as not experiencing sexuality enough in a way that would make it very quick for people to assume that I was stunted, but also why it was something that became so common within my school to assume this, that the teachers joined in, and it was so normalized. Like one of my nicknames given to me by one of my teachers in front of the whole class, and I'm not gonna say what the name came from, but you can probably guess it. It the name was Spasman. That was what people called me in class. That's what my history teacher liked to call me in class. And everyone thought that was totally hilarious. And at the time, no one really thought about the fact that this was something that the school faculty were casually doing and saying in class. And I found that because it was so widespread, it kind of became almost, it ended up connecting to this wider issue that you tended to see, that you still tend to see in education. And it's the kind of thing I didn't really realize until later. Actually, it was something I didn't really think about until there was a documentary on BBC, I think it was a few years ago, part of the Small Act series. There was one on education. I don't know if anyone saw that, but it was discussing the history in the UK of children, particularly children from the Caribbean, being very quickly deemed as having limited intellectual capacity compared to children of other races. Teachers are very, very quick, if you're a Black kid with any kind of perceived difference, to assume that you are inherently a troublemaker or you're inherently too slow to keep up. They're within the system that we used to have, there were Black children were regularly categorized as being mentally subnormal and put into schools for educationally subnormal children. And even today, there was a study by the Guardian in 2021, which found that exclusion rates for Black Caribbean students still are, you're 6 times more likely than your white peers to be excluded from school. And even in areas like Cambridgeshire, where there aren't even that many Black students in the first place, there's still so much more likely. The punishments are a lot harsher. And I almost ended up becoming one of those statistics because I was just perceived as not really fitting, meeting the preconceived milestones. And that difference as a Black kid is inherently seen as you trying to cause trouble. And so every little thing that you do is easily seen as being a kind of threat to the way things are supposed to be. And I mean, I was a prefect when I was 16, so I was good enough at school to be a prefect, well behaved enough, but I almost didn't even get to be in school when I was 16 because I got a red streak in my hair. And the teachers said that if I did one more thing wrong, they would kick me out on the basis of me getting that red streak. And my white friend dyed her hair green and shaved it into a mohawk, and they told her to wear a hat. And that was pretty much all it was. And I noticed that disparity, but I didn't really think about it at the time why my red braid was so controversial, even though I got it removed the next day, but the green mohawk could stay. And it took me a long time to kind of understand that these experiences weren't actually just something very unique to me. I'm sure, obviously this is a widespread issue within the education system that still very much exists. We're only just starting to consider, the asexual community in general before you even get on to thinking about the ways that race intersects with that. And only upon, kind of finishing education and getting to do more research into the wider systemic issues that I start to realize that all the things I experienced are actually symptomatic of something a lot wider. And it took me a long time, even everything I achieved in education, I feel like was in spite of that stuff. I feel like I was told constantly by my teachers that I would never achieve anything. In fact, at my end of year assembly, we all got to vote people how we kind of predicted their future. And my teachers and students decided that I was most likely to still be living at home when I'm 30. That was their assumption for me, which everyone in my year group thought was hilarious. I didn't. And so I think the one good thing is, while it made me very paranoid about ever being perceived as being less intelligent, which is not even something we should really care about that much, but it's something that I had a very big complex about. But it made me a hardcore perfectionist in everything. And I got a scholarship straight out of secondary school. And then at uni, I was one of those dedicated students. I made sure I got a first in my undergrad. And then I was determined to go to one of the best universities in the world. Went to UCL, got a Master's of Merit. And even I can honestly say I only went to UCL to prove a point, not even because I thought it would be fun. I literally only did a master's because when I got my sociology degree, some people were like, oh, well, that's an easy one. Oh, that wasn't a university's not even that high ranking. That's a Mickey Mouse degree, whatever. And I was like, great. So I got a first in that, and I'm still not seen as being smart enough. So if I go to UCL, no one can then deny that I'm smart. So I think it definitely pushed me in a sense to be as you know, to try and achieve as much as possible. But at the same time, I still had to unlearn a lot of complexes. And like, I was the kind of person, if I did badly on one test, I would be absolutely devastated about it. Even if the grade didn't amount to anything, even if it didn't contribute to my end of year grade, I'd be like horrified and embarrassed and very ashamed of myself. And I feel like all of these things could be so easily preventable if we were to just acknowledge that these issues of the past have still left like a lasting legacy, and that it is still having an impact, and that the different ways that everyone's different intersections can actually interact in a way that can amplify the issues of the past and continue to influence you well into the future. So hopefully that, I don't know, just gave people a bit of food for thought in terms of how those experiences can go. And thank you for listening.
It was very triggering for me.
Sorry.
No, because at school, I remember my teacher saying to me, Mademoiselle Elmitri, you will never get anywhere in life. You're a woman of color, you're an Arab, you're from a working class background, you've got no qualification, and your parents have no connection. Like, they were listing all the barriers, and I'd forgotten.
Sorry. But it goes to show, like, I mean, you were in school at probably like a different time to me, and yet these things are still very much a commonplace. And it's strange because it wasn't even like my school wasn't diverse, but people still, they weren't even thinking, they weren't even thinking about that kind of thing. And it still happens. I have a young cousin who's 13. He had to leave multiple schools because of racism, because people were saying racist things to him in the playground, like calling him the N-word. And I was very shocked, because at least for me, that didn't happen in the playground. And I'm like, how is this still that much of a
But I'm
a
also
thing?
thinking how difficult it must have been for you to constantly have to, you know, there's something different, but there isn't even the vocabulary available to identify why you feel different. Am I right?
No, I mean, I
Did
think
the word asexual exist?
it did. I mean, the thing is, even when I had the vocabulary, it wasn't useful because no one believed me. What's the point in having vocabulary if no one hears you when you use it? So even though I was able to say, when people ask, I could say, hey, I'm asexual. That's the answer to the question. The response would be, no, you're not. Look at you, you're not. And so it's like, okay, well, that was unsuccessful. I can't use that at all. And so it was something I lived by, like a don't ask, don't tell policy for a while. I became exceptionally skilled at dodging any conversations about sexuality throughout, like from the time I finished secondary school, like well through my master's, like no one knew. I was very good at.
But the impact of having to edit yourself and filter yourself must have taken a toll on your mental health.
I mean, I feel like, I know, I mean, I guess it probably did, but at that point, I was just like, for all of the experience I had in education, I just wanted to keep my head above water as much as possible. So in like the scale of things, I was like, I feel like asexuality wasn't even like something that I was very concerned about while I was in education. It's just that like, if other people were more interested in it and placed the emphasis on it, I wouldn't have questioned myself at all if people didn't start questioning me. I didn't question whether it was being asexual was the problem. I didn't question whether it was going to impact anything. It wasn't, or didn't question whether there might be something wrong with me. It wasn't until people would very quickly say, oh, so you got abused or something, right? That's obviously what happened here. And I'm like,
but it feels like that's the same narratives they were using like decades ago about the L, the G, the B, all of these misconceptions. So thank you so much for sharing your story. But there's something exciting in the pipeline with Stonewall, isn't there?
yeah, so I mean, as I was saying, there hasn't really been any research or anything into what the asexual experience is and the impact of acephobia in the UK. And on April 6th, I launched a project with Stonewall called the Stonewall Yasmin Benoit Ace Project. And we're going to be producing a report into asexual discrimination in education and healthcare and in the workplace. And hopefully we can then share that out there, share the findings, and suggest policy and legislative changes, and hopefully get asexual people the protection that we haven't ever had in the UK, and end the pathologization of asexuality and get us covered by the Equality Act properly, and hopefully included in sex education so people don't have to be so confused still. Like sex education needs a lot of updates.
Exactly, which is actually the topic of the next talk, where Felice is going to talk about allonormativity, which is every single representation that we see is linked to, even like the first time you meet someone, it's like, do you have a partner? Are you married? Yeah, like it's just like part of every banter. And if you could just go, no, I'm not interested, or I'm don't want to have a relationship, or I am asexual, or I am aromantic. I think people can't compute that, right?
It's just because of like the way we're taught to kind of conceptualize and understand sexuality and relationships in our culture. Even though I think our conversations have diversified a lot, with it's still very much focused on kind of who you want to have sex with and how kind of ends up being like the forefront of the conversations. People don't really place as much emphasis onto the aspects that you're not feeling, and how, you know, that actually is equal to the part that you are feeling. Like the attraction that you don't have can play as much of a role, and the aspects that are like lower levels and higher levels can play as much of an impact on your sexuality as everything else. But
and also I think people don't understand, because you're a model and very successful one, and sometimes you appear in adverts in lingerie, and people don't really understand that you can still be sexy but not feel sexual. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know it's strange that I didn't realize that it was actually as much of a phenomenon that would still be confusing at this point in time. Like I kind of assumed we were beyond thinking that someone has to dress a certain way because of what their sexual orientation is, and that like women or anyone only dresses because they want to sexually attract someone. I thought we were like out of point where we know people just wear clothes because they like it. You can just wear what you want to wear because you feel good in it. I was quite surprised to realize that so many people still have this idea that like you're only dressing because you want a man to have sex with you. And so if you're doing your hair, you're wearing eyeliner, I've been told that pretty much everything, skinny jeans, t-shirts, like everything is it's designed to titillate a man. And so the male gaze. So it's very strange that that's actually still such a widespread idea that people still find it perplexing.
Fantastic. I'm conscious of time. I mean, I just want to talk to you until the end of the night. Let's have a glass of Prosecco after this conversation. Has anybody got any question for Yasmin before we go? Yes, Arjan.
Thank you so much, for giving us your experience. One thing in particular I was wanting to ask, you spoke quite a bit, obviously, about kind of discrimination you faced in education, and putting aside obviously the societal changes needed that you've kind of addressed, policy acts, etc. Who do you think could be playing the biggest role in challenging the experiences? Is it the teachers that need to take more proactive roles? Is it students need to be informed? Is it parents? Where do you think is the question? Obviously all, but where do you think the priority is?
I mean, I think I would place the emphasis probably on your teachers, because I think they kind of set the climate within your school, and they kind of set the culture and set the standard. If a teacher plays into something, then, or if the teacher doesn't acknowledge something, everyone in that room will get the same message of, oh, that's not important, or oh, we can get away with that. And so I think, and it's also like when you're that age, I mean, you do gain a lot of your kind of self-awareness from your peers, but you're also still looking for a sort of semblance of like adult approval. I mean, that's why the teacher there, you're kind of, you get a lot of messages from, that's why everyone has a favorite teacher, and you tend to hold that with you for a long time. But I think everyone also remembers their least favorite teacher and the impact that had on people. So I think that not just in terms of like, where and including that in the curriculum and everything, but also just within the attitudes of the staff and how they handle when they hear these conversations happening in their class, which direction they steer it, and how they can pick up the things that might not be exceptionally obvious and just make sure that it is an environment where, you know, you can feel safe to just be yourself there and know that it's not going to have a detrimental effect on the rest of your education.
Thank you, Yasmin. Can we give Yasmin a massive round of applause?